Did you say Drake May reminds you of Phillip Rivers in that he?
Yeah, his personality. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. All right. So Drake May's here, and we'll talk about what you think they're going to be working on him with this offseason. But yeah, well, that'd be great if he was Phillip Rivers. I mean, hopefully he wins a little bit more, but that would be awesome. I mean, ideal.
Phillip
Hall of
Rivers won
Famer.
a bunch. Like, he
Didn't
was
win a
good.
Super Bowl though,
Didn't win a Super Bowl, but
and he sucked with Indianapolis.
I would say
last
like
year.
I would say like if you looked at like the result of most of these when you come off of a legendary quarterback, like what Miami had after Dan Marino, what Buffalo had after Jim Kelly, what Denver had after John Elway. If you wind up with Phillip Rivers 4 years after Tom Brady, like that's not a bad result.
Oh, by the way, I would tell you that I would take Phillip any organization. I mean, short of Joe Namath, the Jets have never had a quarterback like that. The Lions have never had a quarterback like that, except maybe
It's a hell of a lot better than Mac Jones
since the 50s. Yeah, I mean, dude, yeah, if you went from, I mean, like Green Bay is a franchise that does that. San Francisco is a franchise that done that, and I'm not positive there's another one. Like, yeah, dude, if you went Brady to Rivers in that short amount of time, that's a hell of a time. I was being kind of sarcastic about the winning thing. But what Drake May, it seems like you like him. Like you think he's got a good personality.
I think it's like, well, you have like this competitive personality with him, and I think like it really matters to him, which is an important part of playing quarterback, of course. Not that it didn't matter to Mac while he was here. I also think like with this one, guys, like you had to swing for the fences, and I've said this a few times to you, but like you aren't going to get to like just having like a good enough quarterback in a conference where you're going to be dealing with the next 10 over the next 10 years with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, now CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert. It's not good enough. Trevor Lawrence, I think you have to take a swing for the fences in this case. And I think if you look at what Drake May is physically versus the other three guys that were available that went in the first round, I don't know that it's that close. Like, I think Drake May is physically superior to those other guys.
Right. Okay, so when he's in the building, what is priority number one with him based on what people are telling you about his deficiencies?
So rebuilding his lower half. You're going to hear a lot about his footwork over the next few months, and you're getting him to throw on balance a little bit more, and then coaching some of the bad habits out of him. And that's where, like, deciding whether or not to play him, having discipline if you do play him is really, really important, because the way bad habits metastasize is if you put a kid in bad situations. Like, you can coach his bad habits out of him, but if, it's like, okay, it's 3rd and 18, go figure it out, like, those bad habits are going to crop back up. So it's either you sit him or you really have to find a way to manage the situations that he's in, where if he's playing from behind, they're down by 2 touchdowns, like, don't throw on every down. If you're in 3rd and 17, sometimes run a draw. And that can be tricky. Like, that sounds good on paper, right, Fred? Mm-hmm. But you also have other guys in that huddle, in that locker room, that don't care about where Drake May is in 2026, that might, like, be like, what the hell are we doing? Like, I don't care about your development plan here. We're trying to win. So that becomes a challenge for a coaching staff to manage. It can be tricky, and that's why in a lot of cases the best thing to do is sit the rookie, even if it rarely ever happens.
Okay, so Jacoby Brissett talked recently, and he didn't like bow at the feet of Drake May. I don't want to lead you, but like, and that's not fair. I mean, like,
no, I know what you're saying.
I should, but like, so he was like not conceding the job. He basically said, if I'm wrong, you can stop me. Essentially, that it wasn't his job to coach Drake May. No, and he certainly shouldn't concede the job. He's a professional athlete. Like, obviously, he shouldn't concede the job. Knowing what you know about him, and knowing about the situation, do you think Jacoby Brissett, I always felt that they brought him in because they knew him and they, think he's a good guy. Do you think...
Right. Well, he just touched so many bases,
right.
He knew they knew him, right? Like, so they had him here a few years ago. So there are existing relationships in the organization with him. Your offensive coordinator worked with him 2 years ago in Cleveland. And on top of that, he's been around young quarterbacks before. Just last year, he was with Sam Howell, who was in his second year in Washington. And he's handled really awkward, weird situations before. He was the quarterback when Andrew Luck surprisingly retired, right? Like when Luck retired out of nowhere. I mean, you could argue he handled maybe the most awkward situation in NFL history 2 years ago, like for a quarterback. In dealing with the Deshaun Watson thing, it's hanging over them for a big part of the offseason. Is he starting? Is he not starting? Is he suspended? Is he not suspended? They go through that. And then you go through a whole training camp where you're building an offense for Deshaun Watson, but Jacoby Brissett's going to be the quarterback for the time being. And then, like, he gets thrown in there knowing, come week 13, like, I'm not going to be the quarterback anymore, Mm-hmm. And so, like, he had to manage that. Like, it was weird as it gets. 100%. Weird as it gets. And like what everybody said at the end of that, I was in Cleveland the day his last start. Played against the Buccaneers. They actually wound up beating Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. And I remember talking to Jacoby, and he had just gotten a text from Deshaun saying what a great job he had done. And like if you listen to the way his teammates talked about him and the way his coaches talked about him, it was like, oh my God, were we lucky to have this guy? Because we were in this, again, completely bizarre situation, and he was able to manage it. And then last year, that could have been really weird, right, with Sam Howell.
Yep.
It wasn't. He was in and out of the lineup. Howell played well, didn't play well. Ron Rivera's job was on the line the whole time. Like, you had a new owner in there. It's fine. So, like, this is never going to get awkward or weird for Drake Maye, and that's an important piece to that.
I think it's a huge component in it, and it's one of the reasons why I think nobody was like really upset about the Jacoby Brissett move, because you knew, all right, it's probably not any kind of an answer other than a stopgap or a suitable backup.
But no one's pretending it is. It can almost be weirder if it, like, you think it might be.
And that's
look at
he's
Atlanta,
and like the character of the guy and the person that he is, and we've seen it enough times now. We heard it from the onset with him. He's he's a leader. He's a great guy. Everybody loves him. All right, does it actually play out that way? It does. He's been in multiple situations where it could have been awkward or weird, or there would have just been issues with him having the job but not really having the job. And so far, it hasn't been an issue for him. So in that regard, it'll be fine, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think he's going to set an example just in the way that he goes about his business.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a guy who learned at the foot of Tom Brady, and he was part of that awkward situation in 2016 here, right? Like where Brady was suspended for the first 4 games. So he went through that and saw that. And so, again, this is a guy who's navigated a lot over the course of his career. And, I sort of view him a little bit like Josh McCown, where it's like guys who play that position and can play it at a competent level and are just good guys and the kind of guy you want to have your young quarterback around. Like, there's a good living to be made there. Like, you could argue Josh McCown made like an extra $30 million just because he was a good guy, just because that's the guy I want my young quarterback around, right? That's Jacoby Brissett now.
Yeah. All right. So Drake Maye's coming in. Jacoby Brissett's here. There's been talk about the front office. There was talk about the Patriots starting a GM search. It was kind of weird. And now I don't know if they're actually going to name a GM or if they don't feel comfortable naming a GM.
Like now it looks they put an actual title to it. Right?
So like you have to. So when you open up a search officially with the league, you've got to register what the title is, and so they registered the title as Executive Vice President of Player Personnel. So that's almost certainly going to be the title, and they don't give him the General Manager title. And I honestly is it all that relevant? Probably not. Like, but I just the constant messing with titles. Like even now, Bill's gone. Like they don't want to give the general manager. My sense is that they don't want to give the general manager title because they view that title as everyone reports to the GM, right? So the coach reports to the GM, and that's not going to be the case here. It's going to be Gerard's going to report to ownership, and Elliott presumably, assuming they push this thing over the goal line, is going to wind up getting the job as an executive vice president of player personnel. There is a piece to this that's sort of interesting where if you want to have a way to poach someone from another team or keep your front office intact, if you did name Elliott the GM, you could appoint then an assistant GM, which means you could go into another organization and pluck somebody who doesn't have that title, and that team would not be able to block that person from going. You could get them out of their contract to get them, and then if you have somebody who's carrying the assistant GM title on your staff, you can block that guy from going anywhere else for anything but a general manager job. So you can use it to go and get somebody. You can also use it to stop somebody from going anywhere else if you just name a general manager, which they haven't done.
But the bigger picture is, I think more people have rejected the chance to interview for this position that have interviewed in general, right? I mean, everyone on the outside realizes that, for lack of a better phrase, this is a sham.
Right? Are they?
Yeah.
It's a sham. They're interviewing people with no intention of hiring
they've
someone?
done so. The rule is that you have to. The Rooney Rule reads that you have to have 2 minority candidates, 2 external minority candidates. So it can't be somebody from inside the organization for in-person interviews. So you can't do them over Zoom, right? So they did 2 in-person interviews of minority candidates on the same day in Boston, not Foxborough. So it just
at the airport.
I mean, if you, I don't know if it was at the airport. Might have been.
Can I ask you something?
But you look at this, and it's like and look, like no one's saying like the Patriots don't have the right intentions with this stuff. They have a 36-year-old black head coach, right?
Right.
But there is a process that you have to go through when you're doing this. Like, so
does the Rooney rule work? Like, is there evidence? I think
that's a long conversation. I mean,
quickly, Bill. Tomlin's a result of the Rooney rule, right?
Yeah. So, like, that's the best example.
Yeah.
So, the Rooney rule, for people who don't know, is named after Dan Rooney, who was the late owner of the Steelers. His son is now the primary owner, Art Rooney II. And it went in, whatever it was, over 20 years ago. Because of these problems that the NFL had hiring minorities into these positions. And so the best example is the one that Fred brought up, which is Tomlin. And if you go back to 2007, when they hired Mike Tomlin, they were obviously coming off of an incredibly successful run with Bill Cowher as their head coach. And so Bill Cowher steps away after the 2006 season, and everyone thought the job was going to one of 2 people. Either Ken Wisenhunt, who was their offensive coordinator, or Russ Grimm, who was their offensive line coach / assistant head coach. One of those 2 guys was getting the job. But they said, we're opening it up, and we're going through a full and thorough process. And Mike Tomlin came in and blew them away. And so they wind up hiring Mike Tomlin instead of Ken Wisenhunt and Russ Grimm. Both those guys wind up leaving. They go to Arizona. Wisenhunt becomes the head coach there. Russ Grimm becomes his assistant head coach. And obviously the rest is history. It actually worked out on both sides because Ken Wisenhunt got the Cardinals to a Super Bowl for the first time ever. And Mike Tomlin, 18 years later, is still the head coach in Pittsburgh. So 17 years later. So, I think that there's again, maybe we talk about this after the break because I know we've been going for a while here, but I think that there's a real benefit. I think there's a real benefit to going through a full and thorough process that they have denied themselves here over the last 5 months. And it has nothing to do with not thinking that Elliott Wolf or Gerard Mayo are the right guys. I think both those guys are really good hires. Elliott deserves this. Elliott's been a finalist for 2 jobs in the last couple of years. He was well thought of in Green Bay. He just as easily could have been the general manager there rather than Brian Gutekunst, who got the job. He was a co-number 2 with him there. He's been the number 2 guy in 2 different spots. I think Gerard Mayo is as bright a coaching candidate, coaching prospect as Mike Vrabel was coming up or D'Amico Ryans was coming up as ex-players. So I think they did well to hire who they did. That does not mean there wasn't a benefit to going through the process that they could have gotten.
Insight into other organizations, new ideas, things.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 98.5 The Sports Hub.